All right, thanks everyone for coming out. This is really exciting to see so many people here at the Accumulo Summit again. And this year it's 2 days long, so there should be a lot of really great content for you guys to use to hopefully get more information about Accumulo under your belt. I'm really excited to see a lot of the talks that are going to be given later. So we were kind of asked to speak together because there is a good chance it'll devolve into just punches. So at least it will be there's that tension there. What we were asked to talk about in nominally was how did we get here, and then where are we going? So I'm, as Eli mentioned, I'm the CTO of Coverse, Aaron Cordova, a co-founder of the Accumulo project, and Adam Fuchs is also a co-founder. Go ahead and introduce yourself, I guess, if there's anything you want to say.
So today, really what we're going to talk about is we're going to take you down a stroll down memory lane for some of you, and fill in a little history for the rest of you. Aaron was the guy that stood up in the room and when everybody else thought, this is going to be way too big a project for us to take on, Aaron, perhaps naively at the time, said, that'll be easy. I'll kick this off. I'll have my group of friends here, and we'll just whip out this database. It'd be done in a few days. So I joined a few days later, and Keith Turner is sitting over here, brought me in. So that was kind of the early founding of it. Aaron, you want to talk about a little bit of where the origins of this came from?
Yeah, so that's about 30% accurate, everything that Adam just said. No, just kidding. So we, this all started in the mid-2000s when data was becoming a bigger and bigger problem. The company leading the way was Google. They were publishing papers about how to handle massive amounts of data, how to store it, how to analyze it, and there were several of us in the government space that were facing the same issue, but for different reasons, slightly different reasons. And those reasons became really important to why we ended up creating Accumulo. Go ahead and go to the next one. So Google's architecture is built to support massively scalable websites. And massively scalable both in terms of the amount of data that it manages, but also just the number of users. So Gmail supports today, which is one of the applications that Google described Bigtable as powering. Gmail has 500 million active users, and in 2012 it experienced 2 hours of downtime, and this was very impressive to us. The fact that that's average per user over the year. The average user experienced maybe 2 hours of downtime. So that was really impressive. It's like, well, these guys seem to have figured it out. Let's look at their technology and see if we can use some of that. But unlike large web properties, who are mostly focused on a large number of users, we were focused more on what do we do with all of our data. So we're not so interested in creating a back-end storage platform for people using, for millions and millions of users creating data. We're more interested in taking the tons and tons of data that already exists and figuring out, well, how can we organize this so we can actually access it and use it? So MapReduce came out, we had, and then GFS paper came out, so we knew how to analyze and store data in a massively parallel way. But Bigtable really brought to the ecosystem a way to organize it and access it quickly. And that kind of led us to the conversation that Adam was talking about, where very quickly we realized that we needed more than just MapReduce. We also needed a Bigtable, a version of Bigtable. And there are several other versions in development at the time. This was, I'm remembering, very cold February in 2008, when we were sitting probably in the basement somewhere under really harsh lights, and quickly figured out that we needed a Bigtable implementation that worked. And at the time, there were several projects started, but they were all kind of in various young stages. And so as Adam was alluding, several of the senior government people on one side of the table all got together and they said, all right, who can take the fall for this if it doesn't work out? And I, in my naivete, as Adam said, they kind of turned around and said, hey guys, who wants to lead this project? And I was like, send me in, coach. I'm ready. I'm there. I was still going to college. I was still finishing my undergraduate degree, so I had no idea what kind of adventure I was in for. But luckily, there were a lot of smart people that we brought on very quickly. As you mentioned, Keith Turner, Billy Rinaldi, Eric Newton, all the people that joined very early on, and Adam too, I guess, came on and very quickly got the project to the point where it was better than the open source versions that were out there. And we were, again, focused mostly on getting all the data that already existed, very quickly bring it into the system, organize it, and make it searchable. So we started out with a read-only version of Bigtable. It took about a month to write, just myself and a few other people just quickly working to just prove the concept. And we were able to scale it to 2 orders of magnitude bigger than what the other open source projects were doing at the time. So we thought, wow, this is really great. So if we stick to the Bigtable paper, this is going to work out, right? And then we're like, oh, now all we have to do is do the right side of the database. That's all we have to do. And that part took the rest of the about 3 years before it was open sourced. And that's where Adam really has really good insights. Go ahead and turn it over to you.
Yeah. So in about what was it? About a year into the project. Aaron kind of handed over the reins to me, and he handed me a bunch of code that was, it was great code, Aaron.
It was totally working.
And when he says 2 orders of magnitude better than the existing open source projects, I think the anecdote from then was that HBase was able to get 25 million records in. Million. So
millions, guys.
Millions. That's right. So yeah.
That was in 2008.
Right? That was in 2008. That was pretty early on. So the foundations of Accumulo there, I think, we had a great group. This was a high budget government project, which meant that as we were in the basement of, one of the ops buildings there with the leaky ceiling where the flowers were blooming, right, as these were tarps that were there to catch the water, but they were very colorful, so they were the flowers blooming there. We also had very nice laptops. They gave us very nice laptops. We had tons of interns that came in and built any code that we wanted. So it was great. It was a high budget government project here. But with that, we were able to make some great progress. And we quickly scaled up to some extremely high profile government analytical databases here.
Let me switch the slides for you.
Sure. So fast forwarding a little bit, in 2011, only 3 years after we decided we wanted to open source the project, we had finally completed all of the policy decisions and getting the policy support to actually do an open source project from the NSA. So that was, besides years of my life wasted on policy, that was great. So I discovered a few things in 2011. One of those was policy is a pain in the ass. Another is that the Apache Software Foundation was a great place to really incubate a community like this. And as you can see from the turnout we have here, the turnout we had last year, this community has grown immensely. We also learned another thing at the time, which is you can't please all of the people all the time. So when we took Accumulo and open sourced it, everybody wanted to know why we needed another fork of HBase out there. By the way, Accumulo is not a fork of HBase. I'm just going to set the record straight there, in case you had any questions about that. But there was some other fun stuff that came up. Yeah, you guys can laugh at my jokes. It's okay. What's that? No, Doug Cutting was the champion on the Apache Software Foundation to bring Accumulo out. So we had a lot of great support.
So if you don't know, Doug Cutting was until very recently the chairman of the Apache Software Foundation, and he also was the one who kind of brought Hadoop to the open source world, so MapReduce and HDFS. And so he stepped up and championed Accumulo, which was a huge support for us, because not, coding on secure networks all the time, you don't have a lot of interaction with the open source community, so it's great that he was able to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so we're going to do a little time series analysis here. This will be fun. Here's a nice chart of the first couple of years of growth this is actually just web page hits or unique users to the web page, to the Accumulo web page after we launched the project. So you can see it started out pretty small and grew steadily. It's continued to grow since then. But we have a couple of nice spikes on there. Can anybody guess what these spikes are? Anybody? Audience participation time here. All right, Snowden is on the right. You see the big, there's kind of two humps on the right there. It's Snowden, and then I think probably the slashed out article linking Accumulo to that somehow. I don't know how it was linked. But, that's the one on the right. Anybody remember the one in the middle? Yeah, congressional mention, right. So there was this National Defense Authorization Act that had Accumulo kind of almost blacklisted in it. So we had some great press coverage pretty early on. There was an organization out there that was threatened by Accumulo popping up and decided to make a big deal of it. And it kind of backfired because as you saw by the hits and as you saw by the growth and all the press that we got, this was an excellent press event for Accumulo. I love this picture, by the way. So, with that, we got a bunch of articles written on, why Accumulo is really there and why it fills a niche that wasn't actually filled before in the ecosystem. And in fact, the White House even came back and in late 2012, as they were debating the whole Defense Authorization Act. Let me see if my laptop will work here. The White House came and threatened a veto because of that, partially because of the Accumulo language in there. So that was kind of nice. We got pretty good support all the way up to the top in the government. And then we were on the map, right? We were Accumulo, we were out as an open source project, and as you can see by all of this fine print, this is a list of all of the databases from 2014, October 2014, and how they relate to each other. So this is kind of a nice representation on, inspired by London Underground map here. And if we kind of zoom in here, zoom in a little more, maybe zoom in a little more. Anybody see it yet? Okay, there's Accumulo. Woo, we're on the map. Okay, so we're this database out here in the middle of a sea of hundreds of additional database projects. So it's, are we just one amongst many? Well, we solve some problems that nobody else can solve with Accumulo, right? So one of those problems, scale, right? And scale with things like graph stores, right? So NSA published this, one of their few publications on actual applications here, was scaling Accumulo up to a 70 trillion edge graph. I wish we'd see more out of that because I think NSA has probably exceeded this considerably in the last couple of years. But this was a great application here. We also have other folks like MIT Lincoln Lab who are publishing about breaking speed records for inserts using Accumulo. So this is one where they got fairly linear scalability up to 100 million key value inserts per second, right? And they put some nice other points on the graph here, like you see Oracle down at the bottom doing 140,000 transactions per second. And that's a different problem class, right? If you're talking about transactions per second, you're talking about kind of these big, bulk, heavyweight, read, modify, write supporting, you might have contention between two different writes. And that's 140,000 per second is a great number for that. But if you can relax the problem a little bit, if you can represent it as something that's just sort of append-only keys, append-only key value writes, getting that sort in there, and maybe doing a little bit of ingest analytics in terms of aggregators. You'll learn a lot more about that today. Relaxing that problem lets you scale up, lets you really increase it by orders of magnitude in performance there. So Accumulo has its niche. In terms of scalability, we had a recent project to support multiple HDFS instances under one instance of Accumulo, right? So we're scaling to the point where we're actually exceeding the capacity of one HDFS instance, which I think that's pretty cool. And then security, right? So, one of the big foundations of Accumulo is cell-level security, right? And we've continued to evolve that over the years. We've added a lot of cryptographic support under the covers, and the security model has evolved. There are plenty of places that are excited about security, not least because NSA, Sony, Target, Home Depot, a number of other organizations have really done a great job raising awareness for why data security is important. Right? So, I think Accumulo is kind of uniquely positioned here to provide additional security capabilities.
I thought Adam would never stop talking. No, that's good. And I'm happy to report, too, that this is how Google, this is a picture taken of, I think, as a Google data center. Has anyone seen this before? Nobody's seen this? This is like Google Maps. So if you navigate around enough, you can find yourself apparently inside of a Google data center. And this is how Google apparently secures their data. So I'm happy to report that Accumulo installations require 0 stormtroopers to secure your data. We've not had to resort to stormtroopers for quite a while now. What's that? That's true.
Well, it's not to say that you can't have stormtroopers. You're certainly welcome to secure with stormtroopers.
Yeah, you don't want your stormtroopers in your data center. That's
layered
the issue.
security is good.
You want them out.
Multi-layer security.
You want them in your reception area. So since Accumulo was open source in 2008, we've seen some great adoption from the other members of the Hadoop community, and this was a big deal because at the time, HBase continued and Cassandra continued to gain momentum, and they're both really solid open source projects at this point. So in 2011, when Accumulo was open sourced, there was this big question, how does this fit into the ecosystem, given that there's all these other NoSQL databases out there? But despite those other projects, the leading Hadoop vendors, and there's others that aren't even listed here, have really lent their support and kind of affirmed that there is a place for Accumulo in the ecosystem, and they've integrated it into their products. So now when you download these open source distributions, Accumulo comes prepackaged, and there's really great support for other tools like Hive, Pig, and there's more tools that are from the ecosystem that are being integrated all the time, which is really great. And kind of affirms that Accumulo does live in that niche of extreme stability at very large scales, and also security built in very early on in the design. We've also seen some great projects building on top of Accumulo. And some of these are going to be talked about today. Others you may have heard about in the past, and some are not quite out yet. So. But these are a few of the projects that people have built on top of Accumulo to do things like geospatial search, semantic queries. Fluo, that you can't see, is kind of cut off over there, is a project to implement Google's coprocessors so that you can do something cool like Percolator, which allows you to kind of do triggers as you're doing writes. You can trigger kind of cascading updates and cool things like that. So there's a lot of interesting, and then D4M, there's going to be a talk about that later today as well, I think, or maybe tomorrow, and it's the MIT Lincoln Lab project for doing linear algebra kind of operations. So there's a lot of really cool stuff. Lumify's, I think, was talked about at the last summit, and then finally we've seen, but in addition, we've seen some books appear now about. That mention Accumulo. So I think the first book I ever saw Accumulo mentioned in was this Hadoop Solutions books, and there's doubtless others. But in the Hadoop Solutions books, when they're talking about security, they're like, oh, if you're really interested in security, you should check out this Accumulo project. which is really great to see. And then a book appeared maybe a year ago called Apache Accumulo for Developers. And then finally, if you're going to buy one book on Accumulo, I recommend the one on the left. It's just really, really high quality. And so that'll be, and that's exciting to see. And then, of course, there's commercial support. There's companies that are coming out that are building on Accumulo, either building products to sell or using products internally to build services that they sell, which is awesome. And again, this is a woefully, these are just people that we knew were publicly doing things on Accumulo that are here today and that are they basically can't deny it.
That's right. If we missed your logo up here and you want to complain, absolutely send email to Aaron.
You can send me an Instagram, and so that's great, and that continues to serve us well. As a CTO of a company building on Accumulo, I can tell you that Accumulo is very well respected in the industries that we talk to customers. Everyone kind of recognizes this as like really solid core on which people want to build. The only question is, what's the best way to do that? So it's been very satisfying to see.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So for the next couple of days, we have a great selection of talks. Being on the program committee here and selecting was difficult. We had really great submissions. We had to figure out which ones to cut, and that's never a fun task here. But you can see there's a wide variety of topics that we're going to cover. There's performance, there's geospatial analysis, internals of Accumulo, try to get some support for the developers that want to share their ideas. A lot of ecosystem, how do we work with these other projects out there? Future developments in API. I'm pretty excited about where we're going in the 2.0 version. And of course, frameworks and security around that as well. So, as you go and watch these talks over the next couple of days, there are a few things that we want you to keep in mind here. Right. So, imagine as you're watching the GeoWave talk, just maybe having come from the Raya talk, or maybe I got the ordering mixed up on that one. Imagine a world where these systems are all working together, where people building on top of Accumulo can use that common base framework layer and really get the benefit out of all of this work. Right? And the Accumulo community, the Accumulo project has some improvements to make in order to support that type of engagement. Right? So a few things I want you to keep in mind. Right? One is that compatibility. Right? So what are the challenges here to schema design, right? To things like how do you define what your key does? How do you do indexing on that? And how can we make it better so these projects can work together, right? There are things like security, right? As you learn about the security that's coming into Accumulo, things like support for attribute-based access control with XACML support on it. As you learn about key management system and how we're starting to work with some of the ecosystem's key management capabilities, right? How do we take that to the next step, and how do we work with the other labeling frameworks? Keep that in mind as you listen to these talks, and contribute those ideas back to the community, right? And performance, right? You're going to hear a lot of great talks about performance, how we're making Accumulo go faster, where some of the challenges are inside of Accumulo. All right, as you listen to those talks and as you go out and use Accumulo, look for opportunities to improve it. Right? Submit those back to the community, and together, I think we're going to make Accumulo continue to be a great, fill that niche inside of the ecosystem, where we can see we've already made great progress and great impact.
Yeah, and I think most of Adam's ideas there are terrible. I think we should do a completely different thing. I think we should start thinking about, making it a eventually consistent database.
Because you can see why Aaron left the project.
Consistency is so boring. The data that you wrote comes back the same data every time. So boring. It's so much more fun when some old value comes back and surprises you. No, I totally agree with everything that Adam said. And I think it's really inspiring to see that whereas a lot of projects are focused on kind of broadening, I think, their feature set, Accumulo is still focused on scale and performance, and that's really exciting. Several years after the project was created, to see that there's still a focus on pushing the envelope is really inspiring. So I totally agree, and I'm excited to see what the community comes up with. I'm really excited for the talks today. Thanks everybody for coming out. And we'll see you around. If anybody has any questions, we have a little bit of time to answer questions.
Yeah, absolutely. So the question here is basically why, if HBase is out there and can do everything Accumulo can do, why not use HBase? Well, I mean, there's a few answers to that. One is it can't do everything Accumulo can do, right? So the implementation of cell-level security varies. It's a very different way that you use HBase's cell-level security. It's kind of a shadow next to the key rather than it. But we're not going to get into deep implementation details in this session. I think there are some sessions later on where we talk about maybe the Accumulo session. You might be able to bring that up and talk about how that's implemented differently in that. And certainly sidebar discussions on that. I think we'll get a lot of great information sharing on that through this event. But then just generally from scalability. And from some of the other analytical capabilities, like what we can do with the iterator framework, I think Accumulo establishes its niche there as well.
Yeah, and I apologize. We actually don't have a lot of time for questions, so thank you for that. And but we'll be around, and hopefully we can get a chance to chat later today. Thanks, everyone.